Our next speaker is Dr. Dorian Wiszniewski. Dorian combines practice in architecture with research and teaching. He's a partner in Wiszniewski Architects, which was established in 1996, and he's also a senior lecturer in architectural design theory here at the University of Edinburgh. WT Architects have won awards for Waterhouse and Crieff in 2006, and in partnership with Cadell for Belfield Dyke Housing in 2007. And academic papers have been published in several countries with core interests focusing on architectural, political, and philosophical overlap on issues of representation and production. So Dorian today will be speaking on gesture and emotion. Please welcome.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me here today. So I'm going to talk about gesture and epoche. Maybe I'll present it in two parts. I'll try and theorise these terms a little. Not really much we could achieve in 20 minutes, but I'll do a little bit of theorisation. These are important terms for all aspects of my practice, be they design practices, research practices, or writing practices even. But the second part of it will be very illustrative. I'll bombard you with a lot of images of a specific project that, although isn't going to be in a World Heritage Site, is illustrative of many issues that we countenance in World Heritage Sites, and belongs to a series of projects that have been carried out as academic research in World Heritage Sites. And I'm not really going to explain that project too much. I think the images will be quite descriptive, but hopefully by elaborating these two terms a little, you can maybe read somewhat into our attitude as theorisers, practitioners, designers, something like that. I'm not going to talk about this, but the first three slides are illustrations of publications that you can go to. If you look at my staff profile on the Edinburgh University staff web pages, I have a bit of a bibliography there, and all of these texts are available. So if you want to know more about these terms, please look to them and feel free to read about them. But I want to illustrate, we have done work in Budapest, round about Castle Hill, World Heritage Site, Istanbul, the old town of Istanbul, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, journals, Florence, done some work in Florence. The projects that are illustrated on these slides are the kind of things that might be produced from a sensibility towards gesture and epoche. But this is the project I'm going to talk about a little, or illustrate, and it's in Edinburgh, outside World Heritage Site, that hopefully encapsulates a lot of the things that are embedded in all those other research projects. But as it's local, you might know about it, and as it's something that comes out of our personal practice, you can see how I do this, not just how my students do. So let's talk about gesture first. So I'm going to read this out. The emboldened text is my text. The text at the top is a quote from George Agamben. Why gesture is important. Gesture is something to do with language. I'm interested in architectural language. I'm interested in how we communicate through architecture, how we have communicated through architecture through time. So gesture is not an absolutely non-linguistic element, but rather something closely tied to language. It is first of all a forceful presence in language itself, one that is older and more originary than conceptual expression. So there's something in that notion of gesture as a language in the making. I mean, we all know what gesture can do. It's kind of fundamental language, basic language, but definitely meaningful, definitely understood by many, our hands, our bodies, in action, in expression, frequently gesture before we can articulate in conceptual expression. So we're interested in that. So what we're looking for in architecture is a language, a basic and fundamental language, an architectural language, a language that is readable by anyone, not just the experts. So a term that we perhaps eschew in our practice is aesthetics. Mere aestheticization is not particularly of interest to us. And we wish this language that we're looking for to be neither persuasive nor something to assuage an audience. I don't intend to persuade an audience on a particular viewpoint. We don't want to make anybody feel happy about their prejudices. Through our architecture, we're thinking that this language is there to be engaged with, to be understood in practice, in the experience of it. People will come to terms with it. We frequently say things like, what does that building say to you? Well, we were interested in that question, and we're not necessarily interested in specifically what it says, but how it communicates. That's really part of our sensibility. Epoche, that's a more tricky term. This is very much for a particular philosopher, Edmund Husserl. And Edmund Husserl is important in my particular theorization. He is pre-Heideggerian phenomenology. I don't know if this means anything to anybody, but it's really important to understand this is prior to Heidegger. Heidegger has, depending on who you're talking to, can be revered as the high priest of phenomenology, or he can be seen to be an extension of a very, very conservative view as to what a sense of belonging really means, what authenticity really means. So Husserl is a person I prefer to be referred to, rather than Heidegger, because we're dealing with something which perhaps challenges from the outset any notion of authenticity. I'll elaborate that a little bit. So epoche, in its original Greek, would refer to something which is a suspension of judgment or belief in the face of the impossibility of attaining actual knowledge. Epoche in phenomenology is the setting aside of all historical and natural assumptions. Not to ignore, but to set aside is an important thing. All natural assumptions and factual knowledge in order to be able to apprehend more readily the phenomena and the subject's consciousness of them. So that's quite deep, and I'll try and elaborate it through what I've written up there. Heidegger is interested in transcendental phenomenology as opposed to existential phenomenology. That's quite a tricky thing. I apologize if this is a bit too deep or too heavy, but also the fact that I'm going to have to skirt across it. But anyway, the transcendental attitude insists that psychological subjectivity loses its status in the world of experience. Husserl sees psychology and its byproduct of egology as positivistic sciences. It's kind of important to this idea of the subject. The subject isn't a single subject in time. Subjectivity isn't singularly defined. Subjectivity is defined over time. That's an important thing. The fact that I'm here now means that I carry everything I have through my own personal experience perhaps, but everything that I observe and experience indirectly and others have experienced and have communicated to me, things which I perceive and apperceive. So the term epoche suspends all action in the real world and opens the world to many time frames, those that do not belong to the subject, the time frames of all subjectivities throughout all history. So epoche is a kind of opening. It's an opening to time, all time, as being like a great big pool of time that you immerse yourself in. So time isn't stratified, time isn't a series of now and then. Time is all time, all at once, and we experience that by simply being. So Husserl suggests epoche might be understood as follows. On the one hand, certain judgments are now excluded, all those that rested on natural experience about this world constantly and altogether unquestionably pre-given as existing. Consequently, all positive sciences are also excluded, for they in fact have the source of their verification in natural mundane experiences. It is obvious that psychology is one of their number. On the other hand, by means of this epoche, the regard is freed for the universal phenomenon, the world of consciousness purely as such, the world purely as given in the manifold flux of conscious life, that is, as appearing originality in a manifold of concordant experiences. So, maybe the key point to mention there is that experience under Husserlian speculation is concordant, that is, it's not monological. Experience is a multiplicity of resonating perceptions and apperceptions. It is heterological. In other words, it's a sort of internal agreement that all these things that come together have some sort of meaningfulness, not necessarily telling you what the meaning is, but nonetheless the meaning is there. There's a pregnancy of meaning in all experience. And so in this sense, there can be no such thing as authenticity. Now, rather than actually articulate a big argument on authenticity here, I'm going to direct you to that text by Theodore Adorno, which is the jargon of authenticity. I'll just summarize it by saying it's a very scathing critique of the notion of authenticity, and its main crux of the issue. This is very bourgeois 19th century concept. Bourgeois in the sense that Marx might use it. So it's a very privileged idea of belonging, and perhaps only open to the pious and the wise, and not the ordinary. So anyway, so experience for us now is imbued with an experience then, and an experience as it might yet be. So this is how consciousness works. So experience and consciousness are complex, and because of this complexity, I say we should, rather than have simplistic, reductive discourses, we have to engage in the complexity of these discourses. So this is the kind of the saturation, the immersed world that I would like to enter, and ask anybody that works with me to enter. And it's complicated, convoluted, difficult, but I hope fascinating. So this is the project I'm going to quickly rattle through, because I don't really have time to discuss it, I don't think. But it's from the project of the Land Size of the Week. I want to pick up this little provocation first, because I see this project as a very localized notion of how to think a townhouse as opposed to a country house, and how we might sit in this kind of understanding of palazzos in the history of architecture. So I can throw up here as a little provocation Villa Imo by Palladio, which belongs to the story first about the palazzos in the city, and the agrarian population who were really rich as the merchants of the city decided to need palazzos too. So Palladio gives them the palazzo, but it's also a working farm, so it's kind of interesting multiple program of house and utility. But it sits in the landscape, saying all of this is mine, and all that you see before you is mine, and everything that this. So there's a very kind of profound idea of how the human sits in the landscape in the city, partly to do with the rhetoric of the urban council, but also how one sees the world. Whereas the Scottish thing, that's very fundamentally different. So we can look at Snailholm or Greenough as examples. And I think these places are less to do with this kind of appropriation of the world and more to do with something very gestural, very human, very local, about picking the right side, about incorporating the movement and patterns of human through the simple idea of tower, but also how the tower starts to express something of the need to look beyond and something of the need to look within. And I think when we see the Scottish Tower, the city merchant's house, so the palazzo coming from the countryside back into the city, it carries something of that gesturality with it. So the idea of how one formalises at this time is fundamentally different from that kind of formality. And I think this gestural dimension is something that we are fascinated by any time we see it. So now I'm just going to rattle through a lot of villages that may seem inexplicable at times. This is the building as it was in its time. This is the Petworth map of the Siege of Leith, which I think is a very beautiful map. Fantastic rendering of Edinburgh, by the way. But also how the proximity of Leith and Edinburgh are important fortifications that are both important strategic locations in the eastern Scottish mercantile and military life. And so this project sits here. And of course we do our conventional surveys, and we record our architecture as we do in architecture, empirically, in the positivistic scientific sense of empiricism, i.e. we measure it, lay it out. But there's this stuff that we don't necessarily really get access to, all the stuff that we see in this architecture that kind of gets lost in the image of totality. And we like this. So this survey was a specially commissioned survey. We asked the client to pay for 2 surveys, one the general one and this one the specific one, and they agreed. And we surveyed every single detail where we thought we could measure the trace of the body of the occupants of this architecture over time. And we produced a move for them. And that was given to Historic Scotland, and they liked it, and they said, yes, you can do what you like, as you proposed with the architecture. But there's another parallel process that we're doing. So we were recording our own gestures in the making of the project. And this is our fiction of the time that Queen Mary visited Lamb's house and was given supper by Andrew Lamb. And of course she didn't have any chips around, she had a cake. Maybe a Battenberg cake, because she was quite regal. And we articulated a whole series of our gestures, obviously thinking architecture. And of course we're very pragmatic too, so we make sure we fulfill the needs of the programme and set it out. So this is our new architecture. But we want to make sure that when we're thinking of this, we're also thinking of this, and all of this amazing stuff. And what we're doing is looking for language, gestural language, maybe lock, beam, lug, maybe sag, icy crack, heat, maybe clasp, slip, slide, latch. This would be the language we might use to make our architecture. Bridge, breach, terror, terms, paper, veil, mask, elbow, brow, jaunty swagger. Architecture is deeply concerned with the gesturality of Lamb's house, but maybe a way to think the epoche, and the gesture. Saturated our new language, our current language, with historical language, historical artifacts, historical narratives. And of course we have to set this out. So what this drawing records is where we find our gestures and where we want to locate our gestures. So this is the existing building, this is the new building. You see this little key on the right, so that colour coding there is the same colour coding. So what we're doing is displacing some of the historical gestures to the new locations. We're remodelling, re-articulating always, and of course we eventually put a planning application in that looks a bit like this. We hope capturing something of all of that opening that we've created for all of those kinds of architecture to come in to our process of working now, respecting them, but also respecting the future and the possibilities committed towards the making of new architecture now. I think that's me finished.